Anywhere you go, give it on. Anywhere you say.
I'll just do these intros and then I will turn it straight over to you two. So first I want to introduce Anne Oxford. And if I'm saying any of these wrong, please clarify. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and clinical hypnotherapist with 15 years of experience working with highly sensitive populations in a variety of settings. Anne developed a model called sensitive leadership, which inverts Maslow's hierarchy of needs to the highly sensitive hierarchy of needs to illustrate the ways in which those with heightened sensitivity to their environment must start at the top to meet their transcendent needs and work their way down to the physiological needs rather than starting with physiology and working up. Which I'm going to stop and say that's all fascinating to me. I find myself on the spectrum, and this, I'm like, I've got to know more about this. So I'm really glad to know someone's out there doing something. So we're going to be talking after. Anne focuses on curiosity rather than knowing as a fundamental state, meeting needs, progressive embodiment as abilities to be present with discomfort grow, plant medicine and altered states, and understanding systems as a means to be self-directed in leading one's life with sensitivity and shared power rather than reactive to the environment and losing sense of self in service of externalized power. Tripping over this. Anne has a 4-year-old child who has shown how powerful this work can be in shaping responsiveness and enjoys being outdoors in upstate New York, as well as the thriving culture of New York City. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Anne. And then Carly Osler, she uses she, they pronouns. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes in complex trauma. As a systems and trauma trained therapist, Carly works with the ways the societal and familial systems impact our mental health and well-being. After 7 years working in Utah with clients struggling to find space for themselves in a fundamentalist culture, Carly moved to Austin, Texas, where she has found significant overlaps in various systems of oppression. Carly's focus on building better internal and external relationships has led them to explore the ways psychedelics support trauma work. Carly is also a practicing artist, recently published in Off the Rails magazine and showing in Ode to the Veil art show in Salt Lake City. So I'm looking forward to this topic and to the expertise you two have. And I'm here. If you're having any problems or issues at all, just kind of call out and I'll just jump right back on, okay? Thanks, ladies.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to try and share the screen, and I'll need some help to know if people can see our video as well as our faces. Are we still here?
I can see your face and your screen. I cannot see my face, but your face is lovely and that is great.
Sarah, I can see both Annie and myself, but I'm not sure what anybody else might be seeing. Let me check.
Sarah says that they can see us one at a time and see your screen. So it seems like it'll work.
Okay, well, let's get this. Play slideshow. Okay. That's still okay.
Looking great.
Take it away, Annie.
All right. Well, I will introduce us, and I do go by Annie. I have a Danish name that can be a little confusing, and I prefer no pronouns and just using my name. And Carly also uses she, they pronouns, and we got such great intros from Sarah. So that was the long-winded version of who we are. And the short explanation that I think will also help in introducing us, Carly and I both grew up Mormon and have had experience working in Utah. That's actually how we met, working with populations there, particularly queer populations in Salt Lake City, and those who are post-Mormon, and learning how to integrate and navigate all of those components. And today we're going to be talking about safety and sincerity and recognizing and healing from religious trauma. And I also want to just pause right now and do a land acknowledgement that it's so great that we can come together virtually. And I haven't been here for the whole conference. And I imagine there was other previous land acknowledgement, but just to jump in and share where we are. I am on Mohican land, and I'll let Carly share.
I live and work on occupied Indigenous land and acknowledge the Carrizo, Comancrudo, Coahuitlacan, Caddo, Tonkawa, Comanche, Lipan-Apache, Alabama, Coshata, Kickapoo, Tigua Pueblo, and all the American Indian and Indigenous peoples and communities who have been or have been part of these lands and territories in Texas.
Awesome. Thank you. And is there anything else you wanted to say, Carly, about yourself that you feel like was missed and important?
No. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, then let's jump in. Can you move to the second slide?
Yep.
Perfect. So before we even share anything more, we want to pause because even Carly and I noticed, even though this is work we do all the time, things we talk about all the time, even as we were preparing for this presentation, we would notice like, my brain is totally blank. I'm having a hard time thinking about things and, feeling very squirmy, distracted, struggling to stay focused. And even in those moments when this is the work that we do, we had to pause and go, trauma triggers. We are triggering trauma that was built in from childhood. So of course, we're struggling to have coherent thoughts while we try to put together a presentation talking about and sharing these things publicly with other people who might be experiencing something similar. So the foundation of our presentation today is to really be listening to yourself, because if nothing else, that's the most important part of what we would like to convey. We will be sharing information. We only have an hour. This is a huge topic. There are so many wonderful resources. So we'll be giving a good overview and hopefully providing maybe a next step for you as you are in your own process, exploring and understanding yourself and your experiences in the world and in your life. So please do not try to get every single detail from our presentation. And above all else, try to stay present in your body, noticing yourself. Notice things like distraction, heart racing, shallow breath, scrolling through, tempted to pick up your phone and look at social media, feeling blank, emotionally flooded. Notice your stomach, what's going on there, clenching, queasiness, nausea. What sensations are you noticing in your body? Are you feeling numb, distant, spaced out, withdrawn, defensive, shaky? Or there are many other expressions of dissociation, of being triggered. And so we would just like to call that out at the beginning, especially because even as I was studying to be a therapist, in my own process, I was having panic attacks without even knowing they were panic attacks. And so I think this is a really important space to just pause and notice, how are you feeling in your body right now, even as we begin on this topic. And then throughout our talk, please take care of yourself. We encourage you to pause, breathe, stretch, walk around, move, touch things, feel grounded in your environment, listen. You don't need to make any decisions today. Go slow, stop and come back, pause, And we'll be pausing in between each slide to just remind you to check in. And so the goal is to be here now slowly and gently. And the goal is process, not fixing. And getting into this present moment in your body is uncomfortable. There's no way around it, but we can do it. And it's absolutely worth it. And it is just about doing one thing, not everything. And please do write questions and comments in the chat box. We're not going to be responding to them throughout the talk, but we will have specific moments when we pause and check in and respond to those things. So if there's anything that you want to ask or share, we will be pausing to do that. And so please do that as well. And also this is being recorded. So if you notice what you're really needing right now is to go on a walk, do that. And you can watch the recording later. So really, really encourage you to take care of yourself.
Thanks, Annie. I want to, just keep going with that everything that's there is okay. And the noticing, like we kind of heard in some of the presentations before us, like the noticing is what helps us make conscious choices about it, or even come back to it for later. There are times when I don't want to grieve in the grocery store. And so I put a little pin in it and I'm going to come back to it later. So even if you're just able to notice today, notice what's happening in your body, you don't have to process it today. And as recovering perfectionist, you also it's not something to fix. This is not something that you have to fix. Our body has mechanisms to work with the trauma that we experience. And so trusting in our body and its intelligence can help us move through what does come up for us. So there might be some of these that you're familiar with, like fight, flight, freeze are stress responses, trauma responses. There's also fawn. It's a fun one. And I want to talk a little bit about what these can look like. So fight can be a desire to become defensive. Fight can be wanting to be judgmental, wanting to cut off, like that person is wrong. A flight sensation, like I gotta move. Freezing, total shutdown. It can be dissociation. Well, either flight or freeze could be dissociation, leaving your body, or just dissociating inwardly, shutting down. And fawning is sort of taking care of other people as a protection mechanism. So if you're wanting to be the absolute best participant, I'm going to listen the best way I possibly know, you might be having a fawn response. Dissociation, it's something that has been mentioned earlier today, so I'm glad about that. But I want to talk a little bit more about dissociation. It can be on a spectrum. Everybody dissociates. We all dissociate on some level every day, and we have to prioritize what we're doing, what's important to us. And we can dissociate out of our bodies and we can dissociate deep into our bodies. But it's a cut off of connection of this embodied experience of the world and our experience of others and connecting and relating with others. Defenses and inhibitory emotions, especially when we're raised Mormon, there's so much in the way. There's so much in the way of being grounded in our bodies. Compounded trauma throughout the generations just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so a lot of times when we try to notice what's happening in our bodies, it might be uncomfortable. We might not even know how to associate with our bodies. When I was first even going to trainings on trauma, I was having just these massive panic attacks. I was learning about healing and connecting with these ego parts, but I'd never been allowed to know myself. So the parts of me that were connecting to what I was learning in the training we're feeling shame for existing. And so I think part of why Annie and I want to prioritize talking about being in your bodies and noticing what's happening in your bodies in this moment as we're talking is because we're in a position of power. You are currently interacting with power. And if you grew up Mormon, you've had a lot of experiences with power that are likely to trigger you. They're triggering me. I feel very uncomfortable holding this power. I've never been allowed to. And part of healing for me is presenting what I know and facing that I can empower myself with what I know and with sharing what I know, that I don't need authority to tell me that I'm allowed. And I want to talk a little bit about implicit memory versus explicit memory. So a lot of times when we think about flashbacks or memories, we think about it's very like explicit, concrete, like I saw this, I was listening to this, I smelled this. We have this very kind of time-oriented memory. Like I went to my grandmother's house and I ate the cookies she baked. And that is an example of explicit memory. But implicit memory can be, I mean, I almost feel them like ghost feelings. They're feelings that can come up, sensations that at the time when the trauma happened, when something happened, they got stuck in our bodies. It was not the time to feel or process them. For whatever reasons, we didn't have the resources, or, you know, if you're running from a tiger, you can't process the reality of mortality and all that exists there. And so it gets stuffed into the body, and that can come up in all kinds of ways. It can come up, yeah, like I said, like little ghosties, little ghost feelings. Maybe what you're experiencing, you can't quite figure out why you're feeling as anxious as you do. You can't quite figure out like why your body suddenly feels warm. Or maybe you do have a lot of insight to what's going on in your body. Maybe you are very connected to your body and you know that your body is telling you that something you experienced in the past needs to come up and be processed. And with that can come somatic pain. So we can have pain that comes up in the body, both from our nervous systems being overly stressed, letting us know things that are happening in our body. But sometimes that somatic pain can be an implicit memory. I had a therapist tell me once that what I thought was PMS or really bad PMDD can sometimes be related to the implicit memories, the trauma of having been sexually abused. That womb pain in my uterus can be reminding me of other pain in my uterus. And so slowing down and allowing my body to tell me what I experienced, it takes time. And it takes a lot of intentional breathing into making room for all that exists in there. So when we have all of this trauma that compounds and compounds and compounds, we can end up with complex trauma and complex PTSD. I think most people are familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which was once referred to as shell shock, people who had gone to war and were coming back traumatized, highly traumatized. And in that traumatization, it's hard to put those pieces back together. Yeah, I think, Annie, can you jump in and share how you understand complex trauma and complex PTSD?
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of the functionality of it, if you think about PTSD as a wound of your nervous system and your body's ability to integrate an experience you had, whether that's a one-time experience like a car accident, or one specific incident that shifts the way your body perceives itself in the world, its level of safety, how to be protected and function when there are these unpredictable, very scary things that can happen and that have injured you. Complex trauma is an injury to the way in which you experience your power in the world. And so it is an ongoing trauma that is not a specific incident, but more the soup you're swimming in all the time and the ways that you understand your being in the world. And so complex trauma happens related to power and authority and overarching systems that you live in, that you work in, that you function in, that are injurious to your sense of self.
Yeah, thank you. I was having a bit of a trauma response myself, so thank you for saving me.
I'm here for you. I'm here for you.
Yeah. Which is very much related to developmental trauma. We have these stages of development. Birth to two is very big on attachment, and goes beyond there. We don't have time to go over all of the different theories of developmental stages, but during these developmental stages, when we don't learn the tasks of development, I think attachment is probably the most common one. So 0 to 2, during those 2 years, when we experience trauma, when our caregivers are highly traumatized and not quite sure how to give us the care that we need, it compounds and creates this trauma of development. So there might be these wounded 1-year-olds who are unsure how to receive care, how to feel connected and attached to others in the world. And moving on into all developmental stages, we can get those kinds of traumas that interrupt our social, emotional, and physical development. So again, I'm going to check in with my body. This is information. Some people take in information, it's no big deal. Check in with how associated and in your body you are. Sometimes we want to be in our heads, thinking. Being in our heads is kind of an escape for Mormons. Like this is where we get to live, and we get to live with what beliefs that we're taught. And we don't get to connect with, a lot of times, what is happening in our body all the time. So again, take a breath into what's happening in your body right now in this moment. If it's hard to connect to your body, notice the air going in through your mouth, in through your throat, down through your lungs. Follow that sensation as long as you can. Notice if it brings you to other sensations like your belly, your heart. If you listen, can you feel and hear your heart beating? This is noticing, embodying what's happening in your body. And again, the priority here is to, if you take nothing away from this presentation, but knowing what it feels like to be in your body and connecting to your body and noticing sensations in your body, that will be a win. And yeah, let's take that breath. Do a body scan. If you're familiar with a body scan, you imagine each part of your body kind of move through Noticing each limb on your body, each organ, noticing if there's any sensations there. Move around, touch yourself, tend to your body's needs. Water's a good reassociator. Go to the bathroom, stretch, get comfortable, slow down, give some space, feel. You can notice what's in there. Maybe we need another minute to notice before we go into religious trauma. This is
all the
yeah,
feels.
This is where I really found myself in a lot of the triggers. I talk about this every day with clients, and it's something that I'm able to mention and body to body, right? Right brain to right brain, it is known, it's understood. And then when I'm trying to move into left brain and explain it, that's where the trauma comes up. There's a defense of vagueness. Vagueness defense is a big one that I'm working on right now. It's a lot easier for me to just say, well, it exists. That's religious trauma. But owning and labeling trauma for what it is makes me have to embody it and the experience of it. But it also connects me to myself and my experience. So Dr. Paula Swindle is a researcher who researches mostly religious trauma. And she's outlined these three categories of religious abuse. The perpetrator is the leader, can be a bishop, a Relief Society president, can be prophets, all of the leaders in the system. The perpetrator is the system. So the combination of trauma can create a system that is oppressive and traumatizing. Or the perpetrator is the theology that is weaponized. And that can look like telling somebody that they have to forgive. Theology of, like, the Bible says it's wrong to be gay. This is weaponized theology. There's 10 impacts of what a religious abuse can do that Paula Swindle has also outlined. There's emotional trauma, betrayal, rules prioritized over people, abuse of power, use of the sacred to control or manipulate. That is one of the things that I've noticed that's been healing and traumatizing for me is, especially as I do trauma work and embodiment work and being in the body, these mechanisms for regulating nervous systems, for soothing, can be used to help us feel comfortable with abuse. Like going slow. Or I think of, what's the word, Annie, when maybe a perpetrator is like preparing a victim?
Grooming,
thank you. Yes, like religious theological grooming. We're going to give you this little bit of information, and then we'll see if you can handle this much more. But using these sacred innate concepts to manipulate, control, and abuse. Religious abuse can also create spiritual transformation, gender bias and discrimination, stigma, isolation, victim blaming, and sometimes, abuse. Religious abuse can then lead to healing. I think for me, I was abused so much that I had to leave, and that led to a lot of healing for me. Marlene Winnell is another religious trauma researcher who has coined the term religious trauma syndrome, which is the condition experienced by people who are struggling with leaving an authoritarian, dogmatic religion and coping with the damage of indoctrination. They may be going through the shattering of a personally meaningful faith and or breaking away from a controlling community and lifestyle. Religious trauma syndrome is a function both of the chronic abuses of harmful religion and the impact of severing one's connection with one's faith. It can be compared to a combination of PTSD and complex PTSD, depending on what layers and what your PTSD soup, your trauma soup is. Yeah. And the things that cause religious trauma symptoms, or I guess there's both symptoms and causes. So I think I'm going to go over the symptoms first. So what it can look like, religious trauma syndrome, it's a lot like complex PTSD, but it's very specific. There are cognitive dysfunctions, cognitive problems that happen, like confusion or critical thinking. I'm probably in some of that right now, those cognitive issues of confusion, poor critical thinking ability, negative beliefs about self and ability, self-worth, black and white thinking, perfectionism, difficulty with decision making. Emotional symptoms like depression, anxiety, anger, grief, loneliness, difficulty with pleasure, loss of meaning. Social symptoms, loss of a social network, family rupture, social awkwardness, sexual difficulty, and again, behind schedule on developmental tasks, as well as cultural symptoms, unfamiliarity with the secular world, like a fish out of water feelings of what is anything outside of this bubble that I'm used to. I also like to think of the ways that in Mormonism, I was taught to be in the world, but not of it. And then I didn't know how to be in the world. So what causes this religious trauma is this authoritarianism coupled with toxic theology, which is received and reinforced at church, school, and at home. It's just compounded so that this is your whole world, which leads to suppression of normal child development. Again, that developmental trauma, damage to normal thinking and feeling abilities, external locus of control. Like we don't have any sense of control, that we are being controlled instead of owning our power, as well as physical and sexual abuse. So I think this can also move really nicely into all of the ways that the systems of power that we are a part of, that we engage in daily, influence us. Yes, there is abuse and trauma and oppression in religion, and it also exists everywhere. And Annie's going to talk to us a bit more about, oh, nope, I'm skipping all the embodiment. Let's take another embodiment break. Take in that information. How is it feeling? How is it feeling watching me share this information? How are you feeling in there? Take care of yourselves. And now let's move into Annie.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So as Carly shared, Mormonism and any religious trauma fits into larger systems. And I would also say smaller systems, even systems within our bodies. And as was introduced in my bio, I do a lot of work with sensitivity in the nervous system and understanding interpersonal neurobiology and how our nervous system information, and especially for me, I have a very highly sensitive nervous system. And so all of this, the volume is turned way up for me. And I think that's a really important consideration as you're listening to yourself and working with this information, is that we all start out with different biology, and then we have all of these different tendencies in our own nature. And so there's our nature that's interacting with all of these things, as well as the externalized systems and how they impact all of us more broadly as well as specifically. And so we all have these urges even within our own bodies, to orient to, like Carly was talking about, hemispheres of the brain. The left hemisphere of the brain will become over controlling when our right hemisphere is flooded. And so depending on your nature, and also depending on the environment you're raised in and the amount of overstimulation, trauma, stress response in your body, you may be chronically flooded. And I know for myself, it wasn't until my 20s when I actually really had a kind of sabbatical from my life in general and how I'd been working, that I realized how chronically overstimulated I was related to stress responses in my body, as well as just influences from the environment that I was just taking on and going with. I had not developed my own sense of core self that was directing me based on my own desires and preferences. And one of the tricky parts about all of this work is that the place where shame likes to hang out, in the gut, is also where our intuition is, and where we can find and understand our own personal preferences for how we want to move through the world. That is not coming from the head. It's not coming from an idea of this is right or wrong, good or bad. And not to say that thinking is bad. Of course, to be able to be critical and think about things is an incredibly useful tool. But our lives and who we are as people is not simply just to be purely logical, that we have these whole bodies. And so if we are staying out of our bodies, staying in that rational part of ourselves because the rest of us is potentially completely overwhelmed, then we're missing our own understanding of how to lead our lives as ourselves. And so as we look at social systems and power, it's important to understand that we have these urges inside of us. People who are raised Mormon, people who are raised in the most, air quotes, liberal, free thinking environments can have these urges as well. And so a lot of our social systems then get set up based on this. And there's a lot of work happening right now in the world to decolonize, anti-racist work. And I also just want to call out right now, as we're talking about all of these things, and we'll get a little bit more into mushrooms in a minute, but that there's also these indigenous populations who've been working in these embodied ways for thousands of years that we also have overridden. And so this process has so many layers to it. Working with social systems in power, working with our body systems in power. We are not going to do this today or this week or this year or in our lifetimes. So this is all about slowing down, noticing, listening, doing one thing, because the urge to be totally overwhelmed when you consider all of this and then continue to dissociate is strong. It's very strong. So it's very important. And that's why we're pausing so much to keep listening. And so being alive in our bodies is uncomfortable, vulnerable, and unpredictable. And so these social systems can provide a respite to that. Obviously, as we look at our social systems, I am, sitting here in a house that gives me shelter and safety and protection. And I live in a community that provides other services. And I apologize, I'm getting a little interaction from a little interrupter. Just one second. there is the 4-year-old. Speaking of unpredictability, so we have all of these systems that can provide support to us as humans and as individuals, and they can also be controlling to us. And the system can benefit from that. And also we can sometimes have urges to put our power in the system because of this discomfort. And so systems that seek to eradicate all discomfort and prevent vulnerability through control also cut us off from growth and being human, and they hurt us, as we've just spoken about. So even though it's uncomfortable to be in our bodies, it is essential and super important and helpful. And in looking at some of these things, recently there's been popularity with the BITE model, especially looking at it related to Mormonism. And BITE stands for behavioral control, information control, thought control, and emotion control. And you can definitely check out that work. And there's also, we'll provide some resources at the end of this to be able to look more into any of these things if you would like to. And then there's also ideas of totalism that a book that I found really, really helpful was called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. And one aspect of this that was really helpful in looking at systems of power was that this book was related to the Chinese government and not something that I had personally grown up in. And so it was easier for me to see these characteristics listed out in a less triggering way, and to identify all of the ways they did apply to systems that I had been a part of, and seeing, you know, even aspects of broad leadership governmentally and in my life that related to all of these dynamics. And so some of the main points that are talked about in that book that you can think about are milieu control, again, controlling of information, mystical manipulation, that there is a manipulation of experiences that appear spontaneous, but actually are very planned. There's a demand for purity, confession, sacred science, that this is considered to be the ultimate truth, loading the language, that there are special words or terms that only that group uses, doctrine over person, that the subjective experience of the individuals is subordinated to the teachings of the group, and there's a dispensing of existence, that the group has the prerogative to decide who deserves to exist. And you can even see this a lot in even marketing. If you just think about how things are advertised to us and what they play on related to our own vulnerabilities and insecurities. And one of the terms that I think is so helpful from this is the thought terminating cliche. And that is an idea presented kind of like God works in mysterious ways, that when you have cognitive dissonance that comes up in you that makes you question, is this really working for me? Is this supporting me? That you are then given a phrase where you get to just put a blanket on your cognitive dissonance and not go any further with it. So it just stops you in your tracks so that you stay in this system of power that is using you rather than supporting you. And so meeting our internal and subjective needs means that we have to learn how to responsibly take up space as beings in process rather than try not to exist or stay in our heads as perfect ideas. This is messy and it is doable. And so part of this process is accepting that we have these urges towards perfectionism, thinking, control, keeping it clean, and having ideas about how to be a good, right, strong, brave, perfect person who always does everything well. And that's not going to happen. Our imperfection is part of being human, and our bodies existing as they are is part of being human. And we can learn how to take up space there with our imperfections, with the messiness, with all the feelings, and just being mindful that we all have these urges toward that is so essential to this process. And now I think it's time for a little pause.
Yeah.
And we can also do a Q&A, check in with the chat box. I don't see any questions so far. So we'll just pause here for a minute to see if you have any questions, anything you want to add. And it looks like there's a beautiful comment there shared by Jason about feminine and masculine energy. And I would definitely say that this relates so much to a lot of the aspects of what we're talking about, that sense of suppression of femininity and prioritization of masculinity as they exist in a binary, like separating off these things are masculine, these things are feminine, and feminine things are bad and masculine things are good. That kind of cutoff is very damaging for all of us and definitely relates to some of these external systems of power. Is there anything else you wanted to share, Carly?
I'm going to see if I can. So I stopped sharing and I'm seeing if I can check. Nope.
Oh, there is one more question. How accurately do we feel the BITE model fits the Mormon Church? I do think that that it can definitely be applied there. But like I said, and I think this is one of the challenges that I think a lot of Mormons, post-Mormons face, and all of us face, is being able to see the abuse that exists in our lives. And if we're identifying something as abuse, the answer to that is not to just punish, but really to be able to see that we can all have those urges, and just increasing accountability and vulnerability and transparency. So I think sometimes when people are asking, like, is the Mormon Church a cult? And I see this even when people are like scared to identify something as abuse, like, oh, well, it kind of hurt me, but it wasn't abuse. That is also a form of dissociation. And that I think if we can accurately identify when something is harming us, that is such an essential process. So I would say that, yes, there's definitely a lot of elements of the BITE model that you can see illustrated in the Mormon Church. And I think it is important that we allow ourselves, even if we're identifying those facets, that the point is not just to then attack Mormons or Mormonism, but to increase accountability and support and care, and helping all of us be able to work with all of these components.
Especially with a lot of really oppressive systems and oppressive religions controlling thoughts, controlling beliefs. Like, it is hard to connect to our own experience of, like, is this a cult? Am I being controlled? And it's not so much that we want to say, yes, that person is controlling you, but rather giving information of, this is what control looks like. This is what abuse can look like. Does that fit for you? Connecting to your own embodied experience of, what happened to me? What was my experience with power? What was my experience with these systems? How do I feel about it? What is the broad landscape of feelings that I have about the ways that I've interacted with power, about the ways power was enacted and interacted with me? Any other? Oh, yeah, I love letting people decide for themselves is very important. Absolutely. We can define and say, like, this is what totalism looks like. This is what researchers have shown. These are what things look like. But academia is another system of power, and they are not the ultimate authority and God either. We all get to decide what our truth is, what our embodied experience is. And when we have these big feelings and reactions of, well, somebody's defining truth for everyone, that's not okay. That's a piece of us that we get to look at. What's going on inside of us? What am I feeling? What am I needing in this moment? I'm going to see if I can go back to screen share. Annie, are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. Do this and this and play. So, yeah, this is stepping into embodiment. Healing from religious trauma, healing from any trauma means stepping into embodiment from wherever we're at. And yeah, for some of us, for me, when I first tried to start stepping into embodiment, I was constantly re-traumatized. Like, and also, like, to be honest, I have like very compounding levels of trauma. So I'm not just talking specifically about religious trauma. But that's kind of what happens with religious trauma and otherwise, is that we can't know these parts of ourselves. They're too big, they're too scary, they're too much, too fast, too soon, the definition of trauma. And so we detach, we cut off, we split off, we those are the bad, this is the good. And so reintegrating those parts of ourselves can be tricky, can be overwhelming, can be uncomfortable. It's ourselves we interact with. And that is one of the nice ways that mushrooms can support that embodiment. And Annie's going to get into that in a little bit, but having the default mode network kind of eradicated for a minute and getting to experience ourselves with a little bit of compassion, a little bit of changed perspective. We're not in the perspective that we're in all day, every day. It gives us a different way to see ourselves and see ourselves in the way that we relate to the world. And again, when we've been cut off from and taught to suppress the wisdom of our bodies, it can be a bumpy ride. And with a lot of people that I work with, like, there's often kind of like, if this is embodiment, we're kind of like getting our toes wet, going in and out. And it's okay to do that when that's what feels right. And it's okay to go deeper if that's what feels right and safe for you. But even getting to a place where you can identify what feels safe, what feels sincere to you, having that bodily knowledge where you can identify, this is what safety feels like in my body. This is what sincerity, truth, resonance, connection to self feels like in my body. That is the ultimate goal. And Annie's gonna share a little bit more about the way mushrooms can, oh no, again, I forgot how many pauses we did, which is surprising to me because I do need them. Check in with your bodies. Check in with your experience. What are you noticing? What's going on for you? Maybe you're really angry with us. Maybe you're really bored with us. Maybe you're a little checked out. All of that is okay. We're not here to tell you how your body should be. We are just asking you to notice them. We were saying that you have value in your body and what's happening in there. And we're prioritizing that. Now on to Annie.
Thank you. So some of you may already have experience with mushrooms, and obviously there are a variety of entheogens or psychedelics that you can use in working with embodiment and all the things that we're talking about. For lots of reasons, mushrooms are a plant medicine that I support and find particularly useful based on the experience of using them, the ability to dose with them and grow them, and the sustainability of it, the ecology of it. There's a lot of conflict around the use of other plant medicines and the land that they're grown on and the indigenous populations that use them. And so for the purposes of this talk, we are focused specifically on mushrooms, but the information that we're sharing could apply to other psychedelics. And if you are considering mushrooms, sometimes based on the culture that you've been raised in, I know I was raised with the DARE model, drug abuse resistance education, and drugs are bad, and mushrooms are listed as a Schedule I substance and decriminalized in some areas. Gray areas abound, and it can be confusing to think about being interested in them, wanting to use them. And I know that has been a topic expressed in other talks today. But in terms of trauma and looking at the use of mushrooms and considering mushrooms, the value that I find there is the depth that you can get to of embodiment. For all the reasons we just talked about, we have what's called a default mode network. That is our default way of operating, the way that our brains, our bodies, our nervous systems, when we're on autopilot, what happens? And our bodies develop around the systems, the cultures that we live in. And so mushrooms can provide a very subtle, gentle, yet profound deepening of your ability to be embodied, because they help suppress that default mode network and allow you to have immediate interaction and experience with the world around you. And if and when you're considering using them, or the first time that you might have an experience with mushrooms, I generally find that can be varied for lots of different people. And that one of the most common things that I hear reflected is that it felt childlike, that it felt like this childlike experience of wonder, of just interacting with the environment, not through a filter. And so, of course, if there is trauma there, then that's also going to be there. Whatever you've got sitting in your belly, whatever you've got sitting in your body where that trauma has been held, can also show up. And in my experience, I don't think it just means that mushrooms are a Pandora's box where once you take it, all of the demons come flooding out. Definitely, there can be challenging experiences. And I know there can be ideas of having bad trips. But in my experience, I just see them as challenges. And I think we see them as bad trips because of the culture that we live in that wants to see things as good and bad, rather than we have a full spectrum of experiences, and some of them are unpleasant. And our ability to be with intensity and challenges, pain and discomfort, and breathe and hold space for it and move through it rather than run away from it is a skill that we have to develop. And if we haven't developed that skill, then it can feel extra challenging. But mushrooms can provide that opportunity to have a deeper experience than you might be able to work with or to embody otherwise. That when we're working with all of these habits and programs that can be running in us, even when we know we want to be embodied, even when we know there's trauma or there's forgiveness or there's work to do in our bodies, just thinking about it isn't going to get us there. And there are certainly other embodiment practices. Mushrooms are not the only option, but the benefit of them is the depth that they can take you to, and allowing you to have that ego dissolution where you are just experiencing yourself. And in that way, you become body directed rather than thought directed. And again, this is a skill that strengthens that being able to operate from and listen from your gut brain, your heart intelligence, all of these different centers in your body that have information and can guide you and direct you. When you are in this state, there is more allowance for that that can otherwise be stopped, suppressed, or terminated because of the cultures we've been living in and the habits that we've developed around that can be so strong. And there's a lot of research to show the benefits of utilizing mushrooms and psilocybin related to depression, trauma, anxiety, dissociation, eating disorders, OCD, disorders of control, disorders where the parts of our brain that seek control become hyperactive, that this can be a very profound way, almost as if you've had like your left arm tied behind your back and you've just become really dominant with your right hand. It's a moment when you can, your right hand can just relax and you can start to use your left hand and develop that strength and that ability. One particular thing that I think is very relevant about mushrooms, and there are theories that Joseph Smith was using mushrooms. I cannot confirm or deny, I was not there, but I think there is a lot of information to show that historically, probably lots of religious leaders were working with mushrooms, and you can see those experiences of personal revelation and knowing and having these deep spiritual experiences that you don't have to just have filtered through someone else, but you actually get to have your own very deep personal revelations and knowing for yourself. And I think, especially growing up in that culture where we're taught about that, and we can see that other people seem to have had those at some point in history, I think that mushrooms can provide that significant sense of your own spirituality and your own spiritual practice that is guided by you as the spiritual authority. And
Annie?
Yeah.
This is Sarah.
Yeah.
We've hit our time. I'm going to give you a couple more minutes so the two of you can wrap up, but I want to give people time between now and the next one to just have a quick break. So just know that we should do a quick wrap up.
Okay.
Minutes. Thanks.
Definitely. Thanks.
I'd love to move to even just sharing like where we can give all this information. Somebody was asking in the chat about like if they could have the PowerPoint, and I'm wondering if we can upload that to our website.
Definitely. So yes.
If you want me to go back though, I'm happy to go back.
No,
if you want to.
No,
Okay.
This is great. Yeah, the wrap up of that is just simply mushrooms are also not a magic bullet. It's not a one and done. It's a process. And so we have our website, safeandsincere.com. We are providing integration groups to be able to help integrate experiences that you have. We're forming a therapist network where we can connect you to therapists who have experience with psychedelics, with mushrooms, because that does make a lot of difference when you're doing therapeutic work, to work with someone who understands these embodied and altered states. And also helping connect therapists who are interested in utilizing mushrooms, who have not had that experience yet. So helping and working with the Divine Assembly on providing that support to therapists to begin that process, so that we're again providing more support and resources. We also are compiling a working assessment to help you when you're considering, how do I assess myself for where do I start with all of this, and do it in a safe and sincere way, and a guide also for how to kind of walk you through that process. We'll also provide resources. We've mentioned a few resources in this talk we will include those resources on the website. So you can definitely check that out, find all of those there. If you would like to contact us, you can find our contact information there. And also some of these things are things we're still working on. And if you'd like to receive updates, you can also get on our email list there to stay in contact, and we can update you about things as they happen.
And sorry we weren't able to get to more questions. Thank you so much for the time to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, ladies. And I really hate cutting you short. I think that the information that you've been providing is really resonating with people. I know I had some triggering moments, so that was interesting to process. But I had, the other thing you should know is I had a number of people texting saying the same thing, that they were really loving the presentation. So thank you for your time and your message. And yes, to all the attendees, any of these resources, if as we talk to the presenters, if they have things available, we'll get them and share them through Facebook, or we'll push you to their sites, because we want you to have as much of this information as we can get you.